For this devlog in particular, I am assuming that you have seen the week 10 one, as this is a direct continuation of my dive into designing the systems for implementing a player avatar character into this ROM hack. And yes, another week of my free time was spent on just design, and it was fun. So let's pick up where the last devlog left off. To keep up with the design philosophy of making everything that happens have lasting consequences, I settled on a way of customizing the base stats and growths similar to what Fire Emblem 12 did with its avatar. Although instead of picking the past, present and future, I decided on the three choices being the origin, the ambition and the flaw. Except for when you choose to play as a wolf, in which case you don't get an ambition and you pick from a unique set of origins. And in addition to stats, this would also influence the actions you can take. For instance, if your ambition is wealth, you're not going to give a stranger a treasure that you have every right to keep. If you're naive, you probably won't think too much on a deal too good to be true. If your ideal is justice, or you're just plain reckless, you're going to throw yourself into an army of bandits to save a hostage. I'm not saying that all these things will happen in the ROM hack, but these are the examples I could think of right now. I plan for each chapter to have at least two of those choices, and in every choice there will be at least one trait that determines the course of action you take. And only if you don't have such a trait, or you're in a situation where two of your traits pull you in opposite directions, only then you get to make the choice in the moment. This is what I meant in the last devlog when I said, but as a consequence of one of the choices you might be able to make, and keep that might in mind, I'll get back to it later. I just didn't get to it back then. But I was talking about stats, and that seems pretty simple. Just assign some base stat value and growth percentage to each trait, add them together when the player makes the choice, call it a day. But of course it couldn't be that simple. Sure, we can set the character's base stats to whatever we want, but we can't do the same for the growth percentages. At least I haven't found a way to do so. So I instead figured out a stupid solution, which is to set all of the avatar's growths to 0%, storing the actual growths elsewhere. Then whenever the avatar levels up, run an event which mimics exactly the way leveling up works, except it uses the stored growths instead of the real ones. Now, if you messed around with ROM hacking a GBA Fire Emblem game, you might be wondering where I intend to store all these values. The altered growths as well as the player's choice of origin, ambition and flaw. The answer to that? Here's how it works. Take an unused character, add them to the player's party, immediately kill them. And voila! Every value that the game needs to store for a character in your party, so their current stats, weapon ranks, class, level, experience, inventory and so on, are now slots that, with the help of the patch you're already using for a million different things, allow you to easily store and access whatever values you need. It is a fantastic method I happened to see on a ROM hacking Discord server, and the name is the main reason I remembered it. And after the statistics were handled, the next thing to deal with was giving the avatar a PRF weapon. After all, it should make sense for them to be a part of a secret guild expedition, and the best way to make it so is to give them the guild's badge and act like they are one of the newer recruits, which is why no one knows much about them yet. And I have established in chapter 1 that new recruits to the guild are given high quality weapons to help them get started. That process was the easiest thing I've done this week. The standard classes get to pick 2 weapon ranks out of a selection of 4, the 4 being different for each class, and I already decided that the first weapon type picked would be given a higher rank, so it only makes sense for them to be given a weapon of that type, with a potential exception of the troubadour/deacon, who might pick staves first, in which case they will get a weapon corresponding to their second choice. For special cases, the supplier always gets lances and bows, so they'll get to pick which of these they want to focus on and get that PRF weapon. The thief gets knives only, so a PRF knife is the only choice, and the wolf will not be getting a PRF. Deciding on what to do with the PRF weapon specifically wasn't that difficult either. I already had 4 different PRF animatons intended for Ilma, so giving out one at random seems fine. For lances and axes, I stole my own idea from another ROM hack that I started designing before deciding to work on Divine Dream. You see, hand axes and javelins are widely considered to be the best weapons of the GBA era, due to the fact that they give units like paladins and generals, once perfectly capable of tanking half of the units on the map by themselves, a way to counterattack at 1 to 2 range, which is where 99% of the fights in these games happen. It is something I addressed when rebalancing weapons by giving bows base range of 2 to 3 and making hand axes and javelins 2 range exclusive. The latter change is what Hurlbutt and Pilum are unaffected by, which makes them valuable weapons even without any special properties. For bows I struggled with ideas for a little bit, but eventually settled on a bow which can attack at point blank range, similarly covering for the weakness of its weapon type. For swords, well, I followed the tradition and gave swords a special treatment. There are actually 2 PRF swords, the classic rapier given to cavaliers, and a lightbrand given to troubadours. And yes, I am making the lightbrand a PRF weapon in this hack, relegating the role of a magic sword to the windblade. For light, exclusive to troubadours, and dark, exclusive to knights, I created respectively Resire, which kills surrounding allies after you attack, and Mire, which deals effective damage against mages. Finally, for the 5th I came up with 2 knives, chosen at random. Silencer, which as the name suggests applies the silence status, preventing enemies hit from using magic, and Flash, which enemies cannot counterattack. After these were decided, I was ready to move on to the portraits when I realized that I had forgotten something. Something big. Every playable character and every boss in my ROM hack gets a personal skill, so it would be dumb if the avatar didn't have one. I could give them something generic, sure, like Triangle Adept or Renewal, but if you've been watching these devlogs, you know how I am. I won't settle for the simple solution if I see a more interesting one, even if it's a harder one to implement. And the more interesting solution in this case was to give the avatar a skill that fits the traits the player has chosen. I of course couldn't just assign a skill to every combination, because there are 216 of them, and that's just a few too many. So I needed a way to reduce that number. And fair warning, this next segment is a bit nerdy, but I love this sort of thing, so I'll talk about it. The solution I immediately jumped to was one I knew from the personality quiz of Pokémon Mystery Dungeon. In case you're not aware, in these games you don't pick the Pokémon you play as directly, instead you answer a series of questions and are assigned one based on how you answer. The way it works behind the scenes is that the answers are assigned specific values, which are then added up, turning the player's choices into a neat set of numbers you can do anything with. For this project, after bouncing some ideas off the walls and LLMs, I found the approach of giving every trait a physical, mental, social and practical score to be good enough to satisfy me. But I of course still had to figure out a way to translate these numbers into a specific skill. Giving 1 to each possible combination of points would result in a small number than the initial 216, but still far too high. So I considered multiple approaches to that. I could plot the values on a 4-dimensional graph, assigning various areas in it to different skills, then testing which area the results were in. I could assign each skill a multiplier to each attribute, then see which one gets the highest total value from being given the player's 4 attributes. I could discard the 4 numbers completely and just make a giant column of if statements. But eventually I arrived at something I think is quite elegant, in result at least. You see, if we could reduce every one of these 4 numbers to a 0 or a 1, we would get a 4-bit binary number, a half a byte of data, which as a fun fact is sometimes called a nibble. That's not really relevant though. What is relevant is that a 4-bit binary number has 16 possible values, which is a very reasonable number of skill options to have for the avatar. I end up using 15 of them, as the method I'm employing means that a value of 0000 will never appear, but that's not really relevant either. I initially thought I could get away with just assigning 1 to the largest number, or multiple if there was a tie, but that turned out to be heavily biased towards ending up with just a single 1. After all, there are many possible combinations where the specific number is the largest, and very, very few combinations where all 4 are equal. So the method got a little more complicated. If any value was 3 or greater, then we were going to assign 1s to those with the value of 3 or greater. Otherwise, if any value was 2, then we assigned 1s to those with a value of 1 or 2, otherwise every attribute got a 1, the result was balanced. This method is slightly biased towards the balanced result, but after testing random combinations I decided that it is varied enough, and I also ensured that every one out of the 15 skills can be gotten by at least one combination of traits. Except when you are using the Wolf class. The origin flaw combination that it uses was heavily biased towards the neutral result. To address that, the flaws give a completely different set of values for the Wolf compared to what they give for every other class. And I will hopefully get to actually implementing all of these mechanics next week, though I'll have to work out the portraits first, and hope there is nothing else that I forgot about. But this is all I've done this week, and I have to say, working on all the avatar mechanics felt so different from everything I've been doing for Divine Dragon so far, and I love it. I'm effectively building a new system from scratch. And yes, I enjoy writing the story, I enjoy taking existing elements and rearranging them in new unintended ways, but I also really enjoy coming up with brand new things, and that's something I didn't really get a chance to do much of so far. It was a nice change of pace. Anyway, I'll see you in a week or two. Until then, farewell.